I did not die in a hospital bed. I did not take my last breath surrounded by machines or whispered prayers. I died on paper. That was how my son killed me, not with poison, not with a knife, but with ink, signatures, and a smile practiced in mirrors. I found out by accident. Life-changing betrayals often arrive that way, quietly, when you're not looking for them. I had gone to my lawyer's office to update a small clause in my will. Nothing dramatic, just a routine visit, the kind an aging man makes when he still believes his family loves him. I remember the receptionist's face when she saw me walk in. Her smile froze, then vanished. You look well," she said, too quickly. That should have been my first warning. When my lawyer stepped out, he went pale. Papers slipped from his hands. He stared at me, as if I were a reflection that shouldn't exist. "Sir," he whispered, "this isn't possible." That was when he told me. According to legal records, I had been declared dead 3 weeks ago. Cause of death, sudden cardiac arrest. Funeral arrangements already paid, inheritance in processing. My son's name sat neatly under every document. I laughed at first, a hollow, confused sound. I thought it was a mistake, a cruel clerical error. But the evidence stacked up. Hospital forms I had never signed, a doctor I had never met, a death certificate stamped and approved. And my son, my only son, the boy I raised alone after his mother died, the child whose scraped knees I kissed, whose nightmares I chased away, whose future I sacrificed my own for. He had buried me while I was still breathing. As I left the office, the world felt unreal, like I had stepped into someone else's nightmare. Cars passed. People laughed. Life continued, unaware that I had already been mourned, already erased. That night, I sat alone in my house, the same house I planned to leave him. I walked through each room slowly, touching the walls, the furniture, the photographs. Every object carried a memory of us: birthdays, graduations, quiet dinners when money was tight, but love was full. I remembered the promises I made to his mother at her grave. Asterisk, I'll raise him right. I'll protect him. I'll teach him to be kind. Asterisk, somewhere along the way, I had failed. The betrayal hurt more than death ever could. Not because of the money. Money was always replaceable, but because he didn't hesitate. He didn't wait. He didn't ask. He didn't care if I was alive or dead, as long as I stayed out of his way. The next morning, I saw my own face staring back at me from the newspaper. Asterisk, asterisk, local businessman, passes away, beloved father mourned, asterisk, asterisk. I read the obituary carefully. It described a generous man, a devoted parent, a life well lived. The words were beautiful, the lie was perfect. At the bottom, the funeral date was listed. I folded the paper slowly. That was the moment grief turned into clarity. If my son wanted me dead so badly, I would give him exactly what he asked for, right up until the moment he least expected it. I would attend my own funeral, and my son would learn that burying a living man comes with consequences far worse than death. The day of my funeral arrived dressed in black. I stood across the street from the church, hidden beneath a borrowed coat and a pulled-down cap, watching strangers gather to mourn a man who was very much alive. The building glowed softly in the winter light, candles flickering behind stained glass windows. White lilies lined the entrance, my favorite flowers. My son remembered that detail, or perhaps he simply knew they looked good in photographs. Cars filled the parking lot. Expensive ones. People I hadn't seen in years stepped out. Faces solemn, voices hushed. Old colleagues. Distant relatives. Neighbors who once borrowed sugar and never returned it. All of them came to say goodbye. None of them knew the truth. As the church doors opened, the sound of the organ spilled into the cold air. A slow, heavy melody, meant to carry sorrow, meant to convince. I watched my coffin being carried inside. Polished wood, gold handles, too expensive. I would have scolded my son for wasting money like that. The thought almost made me smile. Almost I followed the crowd inside, sitting near the back, keeping my head low. Every step forward felt unreal. The scent of incense wrapped around me, thick and suffocating. It smelled like endings. People cried, real tears, real pain. A woman in the front row sobbed loudly, clutching a handkerchief. My sister dabbed at her eyes, her shoulders trembling. Their grief was honest, and that somehow hurt the most. They were mourning a lie crafted by the one person who should have protected them from it. Then I saw him. My son stood near the front, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit. His hair was neat, his posture straight. He looked composed, too composed. He greeted guests with gentle nods and practiced sighs, accepting condolences with calm gratitude. "I miss him so much," he said, voice steady. "He was everything to me." Each word struck like a blade. Not once did he break. Not once did his voice tremble. No red eyes, no shaking hands. Instead, when he thought no one was watching, I saw it, the faint curve of his lips, the quiet satisfaction in his eyes. He was smiling. That smile hurt more than any document ever could. The priest began the service, speaking of life, legacy, and love. He described me as a devoted father, a man who gave endlessly, who asked for little in return. Heads nodded. People murmured in agreement. I wondered if my son heard those words, or if he was already counting numbers in his mind. Bank accounts, properties, investments, the future he believed he had finally claimed. Then came the eulogies. A former colleague spoke of my honesty. A neighbor talked about my kindness. Each story painted a man my son had known well, and still chosen to erase. Finally, my son stepped forward. The room grew silent. He paused, hands resting on the podium, head bowed as if overcome with emotion. A masterful performance. He inhaled slowly, then began. "My father was my hero," he said. "He gave up everything so I could have a better life." His voice cracked, just enough. I wish I had told him how grateful I was, how much I loved him. A murmur of sympathy rippled through the room. I clenched my fists, because I knew the truth. He had told me nothing, not gratitude, not love, not goodbye, only silence and paperwork. As he finished, he wiped at eyes that produced no tears. Applause followed, soft, respectful, undeserved. That was when I knew this funeral wasn't about mourning me. It was about celebrating my absence. I rose slowly from my seat, heart pounding not with fear, but with resolve. The weight of betrayal pressed heavy on my chest, but beneath it burned something stronger, truth. The organ swelled again as the priest prepared to close the service. I stepped into the aisle. The doors at the front of the church stood between me and a lie that had gone on long enough. It was time to end it. The church doors opened with a sound that did not belong in a place of mourning. It wasn't loud, it wasn't violent, but it cut through the air like a crack in reality itself. Every head turned. At first, no one understood what they were seeing. Minds searched for explanations, late guests, a grieving relative, a stranger who had lost his way. The organ faltered, notes dying in the hollow space above us. Then I stepped fully into the light. The silence that followed was absolute. Faces drained of color, as if death itself had passed through the room. A woman gasped and clutched the pew. Someone whispered a prayer. Another voice screamed my name. The priest froze mid-step, Bible slipping from his hands and hitting the floor with a dull thud. I walked forward slowly, each step echoing against the marble aisle. I did not rush. I did not shout. I had spent weeks being dead. I could afford patience. I saw myself reflected in 100 terrified eyes. And then I saw him. My son stood at the podium, his hands still gripping the edges, as if the wood could keep him upright. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His face turned ashen, lips trembling, eyes locked on mine, as though staring at a ghost clawing its way out of the grave. "No," he whispered. That single word shattered him. Murmurs exploded around the room. "That's him. But this isn't possible." Someone screamed. Another person fainted. I stopped walking when I reached the coffin. My coffin. I placed my hand gently on the polished wood, feeling the cold surface beneath my palm. Too smooth, too final. I exhaled slowly, steadying myself. Then I looked up at my son. I hope you didn't rush the service, I said quietly. My voice carried farther than I expected. You're going to miss the best part. The sound he made then wasn't a word. It was raw fear. He staggered back, shaking his head violently. This isn't real, he said, louder now, desperate. You're dead, I saw the papers. He stopped, because he realized what he had just admitted. The room erupted. What did he say? Papers. You said he was dead. My son's breathing became frantic. His eyes darted around the church, searching for escape, for someone to save him. When his gaze met mine again, I saw something I had never seen in him before. Terror. He turned and ran. He didn't make it far. I moved faster than I thought I could, my hand closing around his arm just before he reached the side door. He screamed, then actually screamed, as if my touch burned. Let go of me, he shouted, trying to pull free. I tightened my grip, not in anger, but in certainty. No, I said calmly, you don't get to leave yet. The room was chaos. People stood, shouting questions, pressing closer. Someone called the police. The priest kept repeating, this can't be happening, over and over like a broken prayer. I turned my son back toward the crowd. Look at them, I said softly, close enough that only he could hear. Look at the people you lied to, the people you made cry. Tears finally spilled from his eyes, but they weren't for me. They were for himself. I thought you were going to die anyway, he sobbed. I didn't think you didn't think. I said, my voice steady but cold. That's the only honest thing you've said today. I released him and stepped forward, addressing the room. I apologize for the shock, I said, but it seems my death was exaggerated. A stunned, nervous laugh rippled through the crowd, quickly dying. I am alive, I continued, very much so, and everything you have witnessed today was built on a lie. My son collapsed into a nearby pew, his face buried in his hands. I looked around the church, at my family, my friends, the people who had loved me enough to come. This funeral, I said, gesturing to the coffin, was arranged without my knowledge. My death was declared without my consent, and the person responsible is sitting right there. Every eye turned to him. If death had a sound, it would have been that moment the quiet destruction of a man's mask. The doors at the back of the church burst open as police officers entered, alerted by frantic calls. Lawyers followed close behind. The world my son had built on falsehoods was collapsing brick by brick. But I wasn't finished. I walked back to him and spoke the words I had carried in my chest since the day I learned the truth. You wanted me gone, I said. You wanted everything I built without waiting for the cost. I leaned down so he could see my face clearly. Now sit still, I whispered, and watch what it really means to lose everything. The dead man had walked in, and the living would never forget it. The church did not empty when the police arrived. No one moved. It was as if everyone understood instinctively that this was no longer a funeral, but a reckoning. The officers stood near the doors, their presence heavy and unmistakable. Whispers curled through the pews like smoke. Lawyers murmured urgently into phones. My son sat frozen, his head bowed, hands trembling in his lap. The confident man who had smiled beside my coffin was gone. In his place was a frightened child trapped in the consequences of his own greed. I stood at the front, beside the coffin that was never meant to hold me. I won't press charges today, I said calmly, breaking the silence. The words startled even the police. My son looked up, hope flashing briefly across his ruined face. That was the moment he misunderstood me. This isn't mercy. I continued, its patience. I turned to the crowd. Everything my son did was intentional. I said, he forged medical records, he bribed a doctor, he manipulated legal systems designed to protect families, not destroy them. Gasps echoed through the church. The inheritance process has already begun, one of the lawyers said cautiously. Yes, I replied, and that is exactly why I asked everyone to stay. I reached into my coat and withdrew a sealed envelope, my real will. I rewrote it the day I discovered I was dead. I said, every asset, every property, every account. My son stood abruptly. "You can't do this," he shouted, his voice cracking. "I'm your son." I looked at him for a long moment. "I was your father," I said, "and that didn't stop you." I handed the envelope to my lawyer, effective immediately. He announced, after reading, "The entirety of the estate will be redistributed." I watched my son's face collapse as the list was read aloud. The house he planned to sell, gone. The savings he already spent in his mind, gone. The investments, the legacy, the future he stole, gone. The money would go to scholarships, hospitals, families who knew loss and deserved relief, people who valued life, not shortcuts to profit. And my son, my lawyer asked. I took a breath. He inherits exactly what he earned. The lawyer nodded. A single dollar. He said. The church went silent, but, I added, he will also inherit the cost of this funeral. A ripple of stunned laughter moved through the crowd, not cruel, but incredulous. The coffin, the flowers, the service, every lie wrapped in silk and sorrow. I said, all of it, his bill. My son sank back into the pew, sobbing openly now. Not the controlled tears from before, but the kind that come when there is nothing left to pretend. The police stepped forward. Charges can still be filed. An officer said. I nodded. They will be after today. I wanted him to live with this moment first. As the crowd slowly began to leave, many stopped to look at me. Some with relief, some with shame, some with quiet admiration. My sister embraced me, shaking. Old friends clasped my hands as if to confirm I was real. My son was the last to remain. I approached him once more. I loved you. I said softly. That was real. But love without integrity becomes entitlement. He didn't look up. I hope, I continued, that one day you understand the difference. I turned and walked down the aisle, past the coffin, past the lies, past the son who chose inheritance over humanity. Outside, the sun was bright, warm, alive. For the first time in weeks, I felt it on my face. I was not dead. I was free, and the sweetest revenge of all was not destruction, but survival.